It's been another really lovely day on the farm at Grandfather's house. Leo, Lily and Michael have been playing all day long, but they've also helped Grandad with a couple of errands. Now the sun is sinking down behind the hill, and that means an evening by the fire.
Hey, Grandad, I've been thinking about something. Why is it if I give something to someone or bless others, I actually become happy?
Yeah, well observed, Lily. You know, it's because it's a law of life. He who blesses will be blessed.
A law of life?
Yeah, it's a law that God has laid down throughout creation for everything that lives. You may have heard more about natural laws, like if you drop a rock, it falls to the ground. But just as we have laws of nature, we have laws of life that God has determined. Whether you believe in God or not, you experience them.
Like being happy when you are kind to others.
Yes, but there's another law of life I'd like to tell you about, because it's perhaps the most important of all the laws of life.
Oh, we'd really like to hear that.
We can find it in the letter written by the disciple James in chapter 4, verse 6. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Okay, but what does that mean?
The first bit may not be so difficult to understand. God resists those who are proud, or you can say stubborn, those who think they know best. They just do whatever they want to do, and God can't give grace to a person like that.
What do you mean by give grace?
Grace. That is help from God. Without it, our lives would be completely destroyed, for we depend on God's grace and God's blessing to thrive.
It said that the humble, they get grace.
Yeah, absolutely true. Being humble, that doesn't mean having low self-esteem or hanging your head, but it means I've got to be completely honest and admit how little I understand about how I am. I don't pretend that I can do everything or that I know everything. Someone who is humble will learn from God and do his will. If I am humble, I also accept the advice of others. For example, you children, you need to listen to what Mum and Dad have to say to you and take advice. That is what is being humble.
Don't you have a story then, Grandad, about someone who was like that? Humble?
Yeah, I think so. I would really like to tell you about a man named Noah, for he was humble and he received grace from God. After Adam and Eve, there were more and more people on the earth. The years passed and more were born. At that time, people lived till they were very, very old, so eventually there were many people living on the earth. But as we have seen many times in these stories, men quickly began to forget God. They wouldn't keep God's laws and commandments, but they did what was evil in God's sight. Noah lived at this time. Unlike everyone else, he was someone who believed in God and who did God's will. It says he was a righteous man. But the other people did all kinds of evil. It was so bad that God was filled with sorrow and regretted that he created man. To put an end to all the violence and sin, God decided he would send a great flood that would exterminate all life on earth and get rid of all the evil. But God hadn't forgotten Noah. He didn't want to let him die, for Noah was humble and obedient to God. God spoke to Noah and explained that a great flood would come upon the earth. He asked Noah to build a gigantic boat, an ark. He was to bring his family there when God told him. Noah had a wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and they each had their own wives. God wanted to save all of them. But God also had a plan for the animals. In addition to Noah and his family, the ark was to house a pair of all animals and birds, so that the animal species could live on after the flood. With some animals, God asked for extra numbers of them. It was going to be useful when the flood was over, so that Noah and his family would get enough food. The ark was to have 3 floors. There'd be many rooms and only a single door into the boat. Boats may not have been common at all where Noah actually lived. But imagine it, without anyone else knowing why, Noah started building a huge boat on land. I can imagine that other people who lived in the area thought Noah was strange. Maybe they laughed at him. And building a boat like that is tremendously hard work. It certainly took a very long time. But Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth didn't care what people thought or how much work it was. They did every single thing that God had said. In that way, Noah showed that he was very humble. God had said it, so he didn't ask questions or try to do it in a slightly easier way. No, he did exactly as God had said.
But how did they manage to build such a big boat far inland? How would they make it float?
For a long time, they built the boat on dry land. But one day it was going to float on an ocean larger than anyone had ever seen before. When the boat was finished, God asked Noah and his family to enter the ark. The animals and birds were brought in, as God had said, and they filled all the rooms. Then God closed the door. Just imagine what it must have looked like. One family and all those animals inside a giant ark resting on the ground. 7 days went by without anything happening. They were just waiting. But then, on the 7th day, something happened. The windows of heaven opened, and it rained like no one had ever seen before. And not only that, the sea and the rivers and the streams of the earth opened up, and the whole earth was inundated with water. The flood had come, and it lifted the whole ark up so it floated. The water rose and rose, and eventually it covered all the mountains. The whole earth had now disappeared underwater. The ark floated alone on the vast sea. So for 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and then it became calm. All life on earth was gone, only those in the ark remained alive. God didn't forget them. He stopped the rain and sent a wind which drove the water back little by little. The water sank and the ark was stranded at the top of Mount Ararat. I don't think there were windows in the boat because Noah and his family didn't know anything about what it looked like around them. So Noah opened a hatch in the ceiling and released a raven. It flew back and forth as the water continued to subside. Then Noah let out a dove. But the dove couldn't find anywhere to rest, so it returned to the boat. Noah waited another 7 days, and then he sent the dove out again. This time, it came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. So the earth began to appear again. Noah waited another 7 days before releasing the dove, and this time it didn't come back. Then Noah and his family realized that the water had receded completely and the earth was dry again. God spoke to Noah and told him to go out of the ark. Noah, his family, and all the animals, now it was time for a new start. Once again, Noah did just as God said. Once he had left the boat, Noah built an altar to God where he sacrificed. God had saved him and his whole family. he had received grace. God saw Noah's sacrifice and gratitude, and he wanted to continue to do Noah good. He wanted to bless him. In fact, it says that when Noah sacrificed to God, God decided he would never again send such a flood of water over the earth. God gave a promise to Noah, and as proof of that promise, God created a rainbow in the sky. Every time it appears, it reminds God of the promise he made to his friend Noah.
So the rainbow is created by God as a reminder that there will never again be such a flood over the earth. That's cool.
I think maybe Noah is my favourite hero of faith. Just imagine, he was that faithful to God. Even when no one else was, he did exactly as God said. Really, he saved all mankind.
Exactly. He was humble, and God gave him a very special grace.
That's how I want to be too. Humble.
Then God will also give you great grace, and then you can be absolutely sure it will really go well with you.